Amen. All right. Well, first of all, to get started, go USA. I hope you guys at least caught some of this. And if there is a more hockey photo out there, I don't know what it is. If you don't know, he lost 1.5 teeth in the middle of the game. And then, they just sort of patch him up sort of on the sidelines there, on the bench. Then he comes back in overtime and scores the game-winning goal, so the golden goal. So, right? How exciting is that? So, very exciting. So, go USA, USA number one, okay? USA number one. All right. In other news, the state of Colorado continues to be a laboratory for all of the worst ideas possible. There's a cabal of special interest groups, national and international special interest groups, who know that they can treat a state like Colorado as a testing ground for all of the worst conceivable ideas. And several of them pass, or versions of them pass. A couple of them passed last year. A couple of them, at least already, a handful of them are in the state legislature again right now. So one of these here in the upper left, Colorado bill would take kids away from parents who refuse to trans kids. So this is a Senate bill. Last year, you may remember, we talked a lot about House Bill 1312. And that bill had a lot about uses of pronouns. You can actually get in legal trouble if you do not use preferred pronouns in places of public accommodation, which means public schools, places of business, churches, if churches open their doors to community organizations and have schools in church. So you can actually get in legal trouble for not using preferred pronouns. Inside of that bill last year was a provision that would force state courts to consider a child's chosen gender in custody battles. So if mom wants to affirm that her little boy is a girl, and somehow the court has decided that that little boy wants to be a girl, dad then can lose complete custody over that kid. Last year, there was so much brouhaha over that, they actually removed that provision, but now they're placing it forward as its own bill here. Senate Bill 2618, the Senate Judiciary Committee passed the bill, referring it to the full Senate. In its intended form, the bill requires courts to consider whether parents embrace their child's gender identity. When determining custody, courts must favor parents who support their child's preferred name and pronouns and push their child to receive harmful and damaging transgender drugs, hormones, and surgeries. The bill states courts must, quote, consider what the parties recognize the child's identity as it relates to a protected class when determining parenting time and the allocation of decision-making responsibility. So it would have to be considered as part of the protected classes under law here in the state of Colorado. So if you track this issue down on the national level the last several years, you've got a handful of these heart-wrenching cases where usually a divorced mother will take her little boy or little girl to another state where they know that the law is favorable to them. And in that divorce, they will get full custody of that child and then begin the transition of the social, hormonal, and then the medical transition of that child against the father's wishes. The state then protects the child and the mother from the father. The father has no connection to the child at all because he refuses to affirm their chosen gender and pronouns. And boom, 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 boom. All of this, of course, designed to destroy the family and to destroy as many kids as possible, to destroy the connections between mothers and fathers and their kids. That's just what these bills are designed to do. That's what this worldview and this ideology does. Well, the state of Colorado is full of these kinds of things. This other little, there's a short little video clip here as well. But this is great, right? So 27 Colorado Dems vote against making indecent exposure to minors a felony, citing concern the law would ban drag queen kids shows. So think about that for a moment. A little while ago, I had a little op-ed piece published in the Christian Post. So now, just so you know, I am a world-renowned author, okay? That's, do with that what you will, right? No, I'm still a loser. Don't even think that. In that article, in setting up my argument, I made the point that now we have drag queens exposing themselves to kids in family-friendly drag queen shows. Well, that little clip made it on to the little Facebook snippet, and in that Facebook comment section, a very, very smarmy and erudite intellectual told me, everybody knows that doesn't happen. And drag queen shows are just a form of expressive art. It's performance art, and children are being exposed to like going to an art gallery, watching a drag queen show, and everybody knows this doesn't happen. If that doesn't happen, then why won't you pass a bill that makes it a felony to expose yourself to a child? Because it would possibly get in the way of family-friendly drag queen shows where they expose themselves to children. The moral ethic on the left is the opposite of reality. It is the opposite of the Judeo-Christian tradition, the biblical tradition, and they're fighting for it tooth and nail and claw. With everything they have, they are fighting to invert the moral order that God has built inside of the human species. This latest one here has made national headlines because, again, Colorado would do something that turns out to be unique. Apparently, the state of Maine has something like this, but it's not nearly this permissive. The state of Nevada has counties and cities where this is the case, but it's not the entire state. But this bill, should it pass in the state of Colorado, Colorado become the first state to remove all criminal penalties for prostitution under a bill brought by a group of Democrats. So as I've read through descriptions of this bill, I haven't read through the bill itself, but through descriptions of this bill, it would intentionally override any civil penalties that states would put on the act of prostitution. So immediately you remove any penalties for that, making prostitution fully and completely legal in the state of Colorado. As it turns out, the 4 or 5 Democrats who have proposed this bill, their names are on this bill. It turns out amongst those 4 or 5, one of their primary donors is Planned Parenthood, so the National Planned Parenthood organization. Can you imagine why an organization that makes money by aborting babies would want to make prostitution legal in a state? I mean, it's a mystery, isn't it? It's an absolute mystery why Planned Parenthood would want to put their money behind something like this, right? So we continue to watch this push against Christian morality. And one of the things I think it's important for us to remember, some of you have, and I'm sorry about this, but you've been with me long enough to remember me having talked about this from behind the pulpit years ago when we talked about the Christian sexual morality. But this is an incredibly important point, that the Christian sexual ethic that comes right out of the Word of God is a civilizational advance. It is a moral advance. The world that the Jewish people lived in and around was not like this. The world that the Christian church was birthed into was not like this. It was utterly and completely pagan. The sexual ethic that the church was born into was not at all what you and I assume to just sort of be normal inside of human history. The reason we assume the broad outline of Christian morality is normal is because we have been steeped in it. Western civilization has been steeped in it. Christian missionaries have taken this ethic to other nations and made them better because of this Christian ethic. So not just Western civilization, but a lot of the world has been touched profoundly by the Christian ethic on human sexuality and family, and it's done a lot of good. One of the ways that I like to put it is that the Christian church was born into the Greco-Roman world and completely overturned the family and the sexual ethic that ran things in the Roman world, turned it upside down, and so then the Christian ethic eventually became the dominant point of view about family, children, and human sexuality, right? The modern world, the modern American and European and Western world is reverting. It's going backwards. It's picking Rome again over Christianity. There's nothing progressive about any of this. There's nothing freeing about any of this. We are returning to, culture's trying to return to an ethic in which everyone is sexualized at every age and nobody is safe. Nobody is safe. One of the most powerful things that happens with the Christian ethic that doesn't get talked about enough is that the Christian ethic did a lot for men, women, families, and kids. It focused the strength of men. It tied them to family. So the marital covenant is more than just an economic bond, a social bond, or a legal bond. It is, in the Christian and the biblical ethic, it is a divine covenant that God creates. And it mirrors the creativity and the love that is in the triune God. And this is how God has designed the family to work and for civilization to grow. So it focuses the strength and capacity of men. It protects women and mothers. In the Roman world, the Greco-Roman world, the pagan world around the Jews, that just was not the case. It was not the case. If you were of a certain economic status, you would find yourself relatively safe inside of a household, but not completely safe inside of that household. Even if you were the matriarch or the mother of that household, you still were not safe from the sexual advances of anybody else who was wealthier than your husband. It protected women and mothers, and it gave children families with mothers and fathers. In every complete advantage that comes with that, we are inheritors of generations of Christians who lived this out and changed the world around them because of it. What continues to amaze me with this topic is how few Christian pastors and Christian thought leaders will say so. It is too offensive. We want to be winsome. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, so we're going to back off of these issues. We're going to talk about other things. There are a million excuses. When, as a matter of fact, what the Bible has is the most profound moral advance that civilization has seen in a very long time. And so here's Western civilization deciding to go backwards thousands of years. There are parts of the church who have decided, you know what, the culture's right about this, and the Bible is completely wrong about this. I just find that sickening is one word for it, as a matter of fact. You should also note that Islam does not have the same family values that the Bible does. There is a little bit of a sense out there sometimes that they sort of hold to some of the same sexual ethic that the Christian world does. The theology of Islam does not. So we'll talk about that more and more as things come up. But let's realize that Islam does not see things the same way when it comes to mothers and fathers and kids and families. So the only thing standing between you and the radical sexualization of everyone without moral boundaries is the Christian ethic. That's the only thing standing between everyone, standing between kids in public schools, standing between anybody and the over-sexualization of everyone is just the Christian ethic. Part of why it's so incredibly important for us to understand, to love it, to find the right ways to live it out, to promote it, and on, right? And here we are at ground zero in the state of Colorado, watching people do some really, really crazy things. All right, so talking about a lot of crazy things, this is something I kind of keep half an eye on just because it keeps on happening. And then over this last weekend, 2 historic churches were burned to the ground in cities that just happened to have large and very aggressive Islamic populations in them. So in London, King's Hall Church in Southall is completely engulfed in flames. So a church building that's over 100 years old, an historic church building, completely burned to the ground. Nobody knows how it happened. Same week in Montreal, Canada, St. Paul Catholic Church has just been burned to the ground. 150 people were evacuated from the area and a food bank destroyed. The middle there is a map of France over the last several years, the number of church fires that have taken place in the nation of France. You can find similar maps in Canada. Last one of those that I saw, there were over 200 churches in Canada that had been vandalized or burned to the ground in the last 5 to 6 years or so. So these things are on the rise. These things keep happening, and we see, especially here, the nation of France has a relatively large and boisterous Islamic population. London obviously does. Montreal obviously does. These blue cities are very loose in their policing of Islamic violence. So it is not surprising at all that stuff like this begins to happen. I wanted to introduce you guys to something that I've run across a couple of times, most recently in this wonderful little book. Danny Bermawi is his name. Heather was listening to an interview with him and Amar Tsafardi, and I really liked what I heard from him. I went out and bought his book. He was raised in an Islamic family, so he grew up a rather aggressive Muslim himself. In his 20s, he got saved, became a Christian, moved to the West, and since then has been in a little bit of a crusade to inform the West about what Islam actually teaches and what the process is like, because so many in the West and the political atmosphere of the West sort of have blinders on when it comes to Islam and what happens. He mentions something that, I forget the name of the historian / sociologist who put this together, but building on some historical and demographic data in different nations, he put together the phases of the growth of Islam inside of nations. What percentage of a population, either in a major city or in a nation they are, and how they interact with the world around them. See, Islamic theology allows them, we talked about this a few weeks ago, to have a certain kind of front with the outside world to hide their true intentions in order to make their way into a culture, in order to spread their religion ideology, to replace the world with Islam and Allah, which is ultimately the point. So building on this data and historically and demographically, phase one is what he calls the peaceful minority. If there's less than 2% of this large city or a nation that is Muslim, the Islamic population tends to focus on outreach, on education. We really do have shared values. We just want to live peaceably with you all. We keep our religion amongst ourselves, but we can live with you outside of the streets. There's not enough of them to make an impact or to begin to demand certain things. However, phase two is what he calls institutional recognition, between 2 and 5% of that population. Then there are requests for special Islamic recognition, especially holidays. You may have seen a lot of politicians around the U.S. and Canada and the West so super duper excited about Ramadan. Those same politicians had very little to say about Christmas last year, but man, they're all about Ramadan. Neighborhoods where only halal food now is allowed inside of grocery stores and restaurants. There's just enough of them to boycott a store, to make it go bankrupt if they don't make the entire store halal. You get these pockets of stories in cities here in the U.S. and in the West. Phase three, separation and semi-autonomy between 5 and 10%. So then they begin building semi-autonomous neighborhoods, and inside of those neighborhoods, they begin creating their own Sharia law courts. Because of the way that they view things, they will live inside of neighborhood enclaves, or they will build neighborhood enclaves, and they will import typically rather radically trained imams from the Middle East. Those imams and their elders will act as the arbiters of Sharia law. There are cities in Germany and Sweden and Norway that are now no-go zones for the national police force, because the Muslims are so strong in those neighborhoods, they've just taken over with their own Sharia law courts. So you get to a certain point, and then you just sort of begin forcing yourself on this. Now, you think 5 to 10%? Well, how weak has the West become? How much does the West, so to speak, believe that its history is evil and rotten and terrible, and we're not allowed to put forward our own culture because everything about it is wrong? Or these Western values of freedom of religion and pluralism and so forth. And so Bermawi makes the argument, and others make the argument, that often Islam knows this, the Muslims in the community know this, So they essentially use our values against us to begin to sort of make their way into these enclaves and so on and so forth. So the mosque, and they don't call it a mosque, I believe they call it an educational center. The actual title is escaping me right now. That is proposed on the northeast side of Colorado Springs is not just a mosque, it's an entire neighborhood. So recognize that this is just part of the process. That you won't be able to move into that neighborhood, but someone else will be able to move into that neighborhood. And then what's going to start changing inside of that neighborhood here in Colorado Springs if all of this gets, approved, and on the story goes. I ran across this summation of some demographic work recently. So these are the fastest growing religions in each of the 50 states in the United States. Now, recognize that these are not total numbers. It's not that that most people who are religious in the state of Colorado are Muslim. That's not the case, right? However, the fastest growing religions in all 50 states, none of them are Christianity. All of them are some other religion. Most of them, over half of them possibly, are Islam. So this is one of these questions that you and I, we literally face it right now. We literally face it. Are we ready to understand Islam, the theology itself, its history, its background, its intentions? Are we ready to understand it? Are we ready to treat Islam for the political ideology that it is? Yes, it is a religion, but it is inherently a political ideology. The intention is to replace Christians and Jews and everybody else with Islam and Allah. That's just its purpose. Are we ready to kind of understand that inside of our culture? And then as the church, as ambassadors of the kingdom of God, are we ready to pray for and to reach out to and to be Christians to our increasing number of Muslim neighbors? Do we know what that looks like? Do we know what that means even here inside of our state, inside of Colorado Springs? Because it looks like, if the data is right, it looks like there's a lot of people who need Jesus Christ in the state of Colorado. It looks like there's a lot of people who need to come to terms with Jesus here in Colorado Springs, right? We love to think, especially if you've lived in Colorado Springs for a long time, as I have, love to think of Colorado Springs as kind of one of these evangelical Christian meccas in the U.S. And things are changing. Things are just changing. So, like I said, I bring you down, I cut you down at the knees, I make you feel awful here in this first segment. We keep on moving on. But this is good for us to know. This is good for us to hear and for us to understand and to be aware of what's going on around us and to understand, again, friends, we belong to a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and we belong to a God who still does the Damascus Road experience with people, right? So